You, peace, you. Hello, good morning. May buntag. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Guten Morgen. Buongiorno. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Dobry otra. Ohaya gusama. This morning, I want to show you the beautiful scenery here in East Vancouver, where this cherry blossoms blooming like crazy. Every springtime, you can see this street almost covered with these pinky trees. Yeah, everything is pink. Alright, while I am showing you the beautiful scenery, I would like to share with you at the same time the history of this cherry blossom in Vancouver, knowingly that this cherry blossom is one of the famous tree in Japan. In Japan, this cherry blossom known as sakura. Yes, this sakura served as an official national flower of Japan because of the popularity it has in Japanese culture. So what I have told you earlier that I would like to share with you the history of these cherry blossoms here in Vancouver. When did it happen? When did it come here? Who brought it here in Canada, particularly here in Vancouver? Now, allow me to share with you the history of cherry trees here in Vancouver. For more than 60 years, Vancouverites have enjoyed a love affair each spring with the soul-stirring flowering plum and cherry trees that line our streets and grace our park. In our city's infant years in the late 1800s until the 1940s, planting trees on boulevard and in parks often followed the tradition of large shade trees, elm, maple, chestnut, and plane trees that were tall, stately, and long-leaf. Many of those magnificent trees that were planted on our parks and streets so long ago still survive today. Even before the middle of the last century, attitude of the park board toward tree planting had begun to change. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the staff initiated a number of significant cherry tree plantings, provided primarily as gift to the park board. In the early 1930s, the mayors of both Kobe and Yokohama presented the park board with 500 Japanese cherry trees for planting at the Japanese cenotaph in Stanley Park, honoring Japanese Canadians who served in World War I. And so, as the impact of cherry tree plantings began to reshape the city's landscape, Vancouverites were soon smitten by their fleeting beauty, their clouds of blossoms, as they heralded spring's arrival each year. By the mid-20th century, other forces were at work that led to a shift in planting practices. The reality that large trees were not always the wisest planting choice led the park board to reconsider their tree planting practices. As these trees had grown to their full maturity, the attendant problems became obvious in the number of public complaints about roots invading sewer lines, having sidewalks, and canopies that interfered with utility lines. By the 1950s, many trees on city streets were being removed and replaced because of problems with roots and canopies, and the move away from the large, long-leaf trees of earlier planting intensified. In 1953, the News Herald reported that elms, maples, and other plane trees were on the way out as decoration for Vancouver streets and parks. The article explained that at the annual meeting at the Northwest Park Association, Bill Livingstone, the Vancouver Park Board supervisor at the time, announced that in their place, park bird gardeners were planting flowering plum, cherry, and crab apple trees. He explained that the smaller ornamental trees give better value in color and decorative effect, but also save damage to pavement and sewers. The introduction of ornamental street lighting was also cited by Mr. Livingstone for the move to flowering smaller trees because they average about 20 to 25 feet in height. Alright, to continue. The Park Board's 1954 annual report stated upwards of 80,000 trees on our boulevards throughout the city, many of which were planted 50 years ago by the homeowners and which were mainly elms, maples, chestnuts, acacias, and other trees which have grown to an enormous size. In this wet climate, trees grow fast, and we have quite a problem on our hands keeping these old trees within limits. The park boards, along with the utility companies, began removing trees that were causing problems with utility wires. As we are endeavoring to get away from the large, fast-growing type of trees, we have specialized in plums, hawthorn, and flowering cherries. Aha, okay. In 1958, 300 more cherry trees were donated by the Japanese consul, Monio Tanabe, reported in the newspaper as an eternal memory of good friendship between our two nations. The ornamental cherries were planted along Canby Boulevard between 49th and 33rd Avenues in Queen Elizabeth Park and around the Japanese monument in Stanley Park. Okay, getting there. In 1961, the park board hired its first full-time arborist to handle public inquiries and to develop a system for recording the planting, pruning, and removal of trees. An extensive tree selection program was initiated with an increased variety of species that were suitable to Vancouver climate and growing condition. These were propagated in the park board's newly acquired tree nursery. Of the 2,500 trees planted that year, most were flowering and smaller species. This trend toward planting ornamental flowering cherries and plums was to continue throughout the next couple decades. Wow! By the time the park board completed its first comprehensive street tree inventory in 1990, nearly 36% of the 89,000 trees on city streets were represented by trees of the Prunus genus, the flowering plum and cherry trees. Of the 479 different classification of trees identified in the inventory, the most common species was Prunus cerulata kwanza, the Kwanzan flowering cherry, 12.6%. This was followed by Prunus ceracifera, the Pizard plum, with 12.4%. The inventory and development of an urban forest plan ushered in an era of intensive tree planting, especially on Vancouver Boulevard. The park board's new plan recommended the introduction of a wider variety of tree species on our streets and parks to increase diversity and thereby ensure the continuation of healthy urban forest. Many of the crab apples and hawthorns that had been planted in previous decades have had to be removed through the Parks Board Disease Tree Removal and Replacement Program because they were unsuitable for our Pacific Northwest climate. Oh, okay. Very interesting. All right. Another factor that affected tree planting practices was the adoption of the clouds of change report for a sustainable region by the Greater Vancouver Regional District. The report recommended the planting of large trees for their environmental benefits. This resulted in a move back to planting, where appropriate, larger, deciduous trees and fewer of the smaller flowering trees. Also, according to arboriculture staff, the Kwansan cherry has proven to be somewhat problematic for planting. Akebono cherries, which seem to display superior performance in our rainy Pacific Northwest climate, have been much more prevalent in park board planting programs. Plums have been de-emphasized due to root problems, though a significant number continue to be added as replacement. Through the implementation of the park board's urban forest management plan, the street tree population has increased to over 130,000, and though the park boards continue to plant the beloved flowering cherry trees in high-profile areas around the city and in our parks, the introduction of a broader variety of species will ensure Vancouver has a healthy, vibrant urban forest well into the future. Voila! C'est fini. Fertish. Tapos na. Alright, this history of cherry blossoms tree in Vancouver was written by Carol Defina, a communication coordinator, Vancouver Park Board. So that was the end part of my first video. I still have the second video, more beautiful. Oh boy, look at this one. You see, this place is like a paradise. So magnificent. You know why? You know why I'm saying that it's a paradise? I was there yesterday when I was doing this video. It was like a goosebump, you know? Oh, it's really awesome. I could recommend this place to celebrate your wedding ceremony, but I don't know if the homeowners would allow this idea, but for me, it's really perfect. It's really perfect. You know, you do your wedding ceremony under these cherry blossoms. It's really amazing. So that's it, folks. I hope you liked my video, and please continue to watch my video. I promise I will improve more my editing and more nice video to share. Hope you enjoyed. Have a nice day. Please click subscribe. Bye bye. Hasta la vista. Bye bye.